The experience is quite laughable now because it most likely was harmless, but back then it was weird and creepy as could be. I tend to describe a lot, so get ready for a longish read. About 9 years ago, my friends and I, 3 girls and 1 guy, all 19 years old, took a quick trip to Firenze, Italy during a 3-day break we had from our exchange program in Europe. We're all Asian with typical slim builds, with the tallest of us barely hitting 5'7", and it was our first time in Europe. We arrived a little after sunset and took a short walk to a building near the train station, where we had booked a small flat that we had found online through a hostel platform. So a quick explanation of how the setup works. The folks we rented have a business structure where, instead of having a whole building or floor fixed up to run as a hostel, they instead find a few apartments in one building, same floor or different floors, it didn't matter. Assign one to be the administrator's office where you can claim keys, free breakfast and snacks, access a communal kitchenette, etc. Then fix the rest up for renting out. No signs or anything says that the units are being rented out or that the building has units being rented out. Since we arrived after sunset, office hours were over and no one would be meeting us to turn over the room. We were given an access code to the building, and then another code to the office on the 3rd floor, where our keys were in a coded box enclosed with the typical house rules. Our room was one of 5 or 6 units on the 5th floor. We unpack and wash up, then head out for dinner. After the best pizza and pasta in the world, 2 of my mates head back ahead to rest early, so it's just me and my female friend going on a stroll of the neighborhood. It was getting a little late, hitting maybe 9 p.m. So we decided to start going back when 2 white boys approached us. They were far taller and bigger in build, compared to us anyway, and also a little older, but looked pretty safe and friendly, and also cute. So we slowed down for a little bit just to see what they wanted. They spoke good but heavily accented English, asking if we were from around here and if we could point them to accommodations just for the night, as they were from out of town as well, and had just arrived. We admitted we weren't local and told them we had only found our place online and weren't familiar with any other establishments. And they asked us where we stayed, and without giving any address, we said, sorry, it was full, so there was no point really. We said we had to go, they thanked us, and we parted ways. No red flags, and we did look back once or twice, purely out of curiosity to see if they had any luck with others nearby. But last we saw, they were just standing there looking through their phones for a place, I guess. We made it back to our place. We entered the code with no one in the immediate vicinity. Yes, I checked because girls just gotta play it safe, you know. And made our way up quietly to our flat on the top floor, greeting one other resident on the way up. All back together again, we quickly changed for the night and we started chatting and discussing our plans for the next day when there was a knock at our door. Now we sort of panicked because when I booked the flat, I had said it was only for 2. We're students on a budget, okay? But it was pretty late for someone to care how many we actually were in the room. So maybe it was a neighbor coming to tell us to shut up because we do laugh pretty loud. 2 girls crept into the bathroom to hide while I walked slowly to the door with our guy friend in tow, who would hide behind the door just in case. Another knock. I spoke through the door and asked who it was. Someone answered back, looking for the 2 ladies renting this place. Maybe it was the resident we saw. Quickly, I opened the door a peep and peeked out, ready with an excuse or an apology, but I instead froze in shock. It was the 2 guys from the street. I gripped the wrist of our friend standing nearby, hoping he got the warning, and he shuffled closer. I tried to stay calm and greeted them both before asking what the hell they were doing and how the F they found us. They laughed and said they lost us for a while, but after running around for a bit, They caught us entering the building. It's a coded door, so how'd they get in? They apparently hung around until a resident stepped out and they let themselves in. No signs anywhere and random units throughout the building. They then crept around the building listening at doors for the sounds of our voices. They even asked passing residents if they saw us, said that we were their friends that had buzzed them in but hadn't given them the unit number, and we weren't answering our phones. I didn't know whether to be amazed, be pissed, be scared, or just laugh. Then before I could say anything, they both stepped closer and one of them put their hand on the door and asked, "So, since we worked so hard to find you, can we room with you tonight?" At this point, the guy with me had had enough and stepped up to the door next to me. He's not as tall, but he was stocky, and with his full beard and his tan skin, I guess that was warning enough for them to not do anything dumb because the two guys took a step back, laughed awkwardly, stammered a little, then said, "Thanks for the help." I softly told them to check online again, and we closed the door and triple-checked the lock before sticking a reading chair in front of it. I can't remember how we fell asleep, but the rest of the trip was uneventful, not counting someone's gelato falling to the ground. And we never saw them again. I do feel bad sometimes if they really were just desperately looking for a place to stay, but damn, book a place before your trip and don't be a creepo by stalking two girls. FYI, it's still considered creepy even if you're cute. I used to be a surveillance investigator for insurance claims, work injury stuff to see if people who claim to have been hurt at work and were collecting free money were actually not injured. I did this full time for about 10 years. Doing a new case every few days for 10 years, you see a lot of weird stuff. For example, one time I saw drug dealers in a downtown city literally riding horseback. You see scary stuff too, obviously, if in bad neighborhoods, etc. Scariest encounter went down about 20 years ago. This was a case in a somewhat rural area, which were always the toughest. You get there at 6 a.m., see what cars are in the vicinity, and run plates to see if they match the person. Then you mostly watch for the registered vehicle to depart if you found one. This place had one car in the driveway with no plates, which actually was quite unusual. You are also provided an age, height, and weight of the person, and in rare cases a picture. So I knew this was a guy in his mid-30s, with an average height and weight. The first day it turned out he left before I got there. Protocol is, if you can't confirm they are home by 10 a.m., 4 hours on site, you literally need to knock on their door to confirm if they are home. You usually pretend to be a UPS delivery driver in a costume with a dollar store item in an envelope with a clipboard. Surprisingly, that works. Anyways, no one was home. The second day I came back at 5 a.m., and lo and behold, a second vehicle was there. A truck also with no plates. The dude came out around 5:30 a.m. and left. I followed him, but he was immediately wise and knew he was being followed, which usually means they are up to no good. Probably working while collecting insurance disability money, aka insurance fraud. I let him go while trying to be discreet about it. I came back the third day in another car, which you also sometimes had to do. This time he left again early and I successfully followed him to a farm in the neighboring rural hills. In short, I busted his ass on video doing heavy-duty farm work for several hours. He eventually caught on and realized he was being watched. I took off from my parked position and thought there was no way he could suddenly get off his tractor, run to his truck and get to me, as there were driveways between us and also a creek. Somehow he was then suddenly on my ass in his truck in some scary rural mountain roads. I was scared crapless but kept driving and somehow I made it to the freeway. I had literally been lost in the mountains. On the freeway, he followed me for miles and I couldn't shake him. He would pull beside me at times and flex his arm and gesture pull over. The dude was actually pretty scary looking, and I had evidence on him that would cost him in more ways than one. I literally called 911 and reported a drunk driver endangering me, but was surprisingly told the officers were in between shifts and couldn't help. There was an easy pass bridge about 20 miles up if I got that far, and at first I thought I could lose him there if he didn't have the easy pass, but then realized again he had no plates so it wouldn't matter. Anyways, after many miles I finally was able to shake him, but he remained pretty close behind. I exited the freeway and found a gas station. A cop was there and I reported this guy and his truck. The cop made a call and I didn't see this guy pull up. Shortly thereafter, I gassed up my car and left. I drove home and submitted my report. I'm sure his free insurance money ended at the very least. The scariest part actually is that I was worried this guy had my license plate and could run it somehow, as I was able to do for work, and locate where I live. I began to research him online. Sometimes in that line of work you learn the potential insurance fraud of the person you are following is the least of their criminal endeavors. Well, I learned this guy was a hardcore convicted felon who had been in federal prisons and was a gang member and hard drug user and dealer. I was scared, but nothing happened over the next few years and I eventually forgot about it. But about 5 years later or so, I had a case in the same rural area again and thought about this guy. I wanted to Google him to see what the police blotters revealed about him in the last few years. I Googled him again and discovered he was actually dead. I learned that a couple years prior, he had taken his girlfriend hostage with a gun, killed someone who tried to help her, then was killed himself by another person who actually saved her. I guess I don't need to worry about meeting him again. I work as a childcare professional and one of the kids that I look after had recently gotten into hiking. I decided to take him to a really cool trail in Salt Fork State Park. We were all set to hike to Hosak's Cave after parking right near the beginning of the trailhead. The entire trail is about a half of a mile, which is why I chose this trail for our hike that day. I also chose this trail because any time that I had been on it before, it was very busy and full of people in a very popular spot which made me feel secure. However, this past summer we had a cluster of severe summer storms, which caused massive damage to the trail. So to my surprise, it was much more difficult and completely empty. I wasn't bothered by the trail being obviously empty because there was a small construction crew working on a bridge that was just barely visible from the trailhead. He was still up for the hike, despite the entire width of the trail being washed out until it was no more than a foot wide with a 6 to 12 foot drop off into a creek bed that is solid rock and several trees down. He is very athletic and I was confident in his abilities, and he was so excited to tackle our adventure. We made it all the way to a platform that allows you to see the entire cave. There were many downed trees surrounding the platform, and it was actually closed at this point, but we had made it this far. So we decided to maneuver around the platform and proceeded the few hundred feet into the cave. We spent the most time in this area due to the difficulty, so I know exactly what it looked like. There were tree roots directly under the platform and you could climb down either side of them. It is also worth noting that Hosak's Cave is much more like a cliff, with an overhanging rock formation and a trickle of a waterfall directly in the middle. It is not a creepy closed-up cave. It is very open and beautiful. We got to the cave and I noticed a candle that was not burning recently, but had been at some point, sitting on a large rock that had a heart carved into it. I chalked it up to someone having a date or something and disregarded it. He wanted to climb to the top, where I noticed 2 more candles and 3 stacks of small rocks that had been stacked up by somebody. I definitely felt weird at this point, but it was about this time that he found a small puddle full of baby salamanders and wanted to catch them. It was the happiest that I had seen him in a very long time, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that it was time to go. We spent about an hour catching baby salamanders, and I watched him have the time of his life. We finally decided to leave, and when we got to the platform, at the dead center in the middle of the tree roots was a wet washcloth hanging that was absolutely not there before. He noticed it as well, but did not pick up on the severity of the situation that we were in. At that moment, I factually knew 2 things. 1, someone was watching us and we did not see them. And 2, they were now potentially hiding in the woods and made it a point to not be seen but to leave an object to be noticed. There was no running back with the narrow trail, and I was not about to tell him that we were in potential danger. I told him to go in front of me, and I just kept encouraging him that he was doing great over and over, and that seemed to speed him up naturally. I never saw anyone while we were on the trail. We got to the car and I locked the doors immediately. On our way out of the park, a very dirty man, probably in his 30s, came out of the woods and made it a point to stare at me with the most empty of expressions that I have ever seen. The man followed me with his eyes and head as I drove by him, and continued to stare at me until I couldn't see him anymore. I knew the third fact at that point. He made it a point to make himself apparent to me, and that facts 1 and 2 were true. That stare stuck with me for days, and I considered counseling after this, as it bothered me for several weeks, causing me severe anxiety. I tried to tell myself that maybe we just interrupted his bath time and he was camping and didn't want to startle us. After all, the crazy-looking man had ample time to do anything that he wanted while we were catching salamanders. I just cannot in any way rationalize why he stared into my eyes the way that he did if he wanted to go unnoticed. Deep down, I know that it is much more likely that it was a deliberate action intended to scare me. He never had any idea how panicked I was, and to this day, it is the most fun that I have ever seen him have. He brings it up regularly, and it was a very positive experience for him. It was one of my worst experiences ever, and it made me feel so sick and disturbed. Back in October 2020, I, an 18-year-old female, was visiting my boyfriend, 17 male, in England for the first time. Since I'd never been to England before, we obviously went sightseeing in London. And before anyone thinks we're bad people, this was a few weeks before England went into lockdown again, and we made sure to wear our masks. So on one of the days out, my boyfriend's mom decided that I should see Camden Town and Market, as it's a very popular area. When we got there, it was loaded with people, surprisingly, and many shops were open. Me and my boyfriend split up from his parents and just walked around aimlessly, just seeing all the places and cool artwork on the buildings and such. Now at this time, alternative clothing and music was very trendy on social media, and there were a few alt clothing shops on this strip of market. I saw a specific place that was crowded with merchandise, and even though I never actually wore alt clothing, I just wanted to see what the shop sold. Now, I wouldn't actually give the name of the place for obvious reasons, but I just wanted it stated that this shop isn't even there anymore. I have researched this place many times since this happened, and it's seemingly gone. So we decided to head into the shop. It was packed tight with clothes everywhere. I genuinely couldn't believe how much there was, but it all seemed almost the same. It was all gothic alternative, and was just spilling everywhere. Seriously, the walkway was so small, you couldn't even really see out the storefront window. There were 2 guys working in the store, dressed like normal English guys, black hoodies, and just regular sweatpants. When me and my boyfriend walked to the end of the store, which wasn't that far back as the store was again very small, we just stopped and looked at the clothes for a few minutes. It's something to note that me and my boyfriend are both very awkward and shy people. So when we entered this shop, I personally was already anxious socially as it was dead quiet. There was no noise. It was just us whispering, and even that felt too loud. I was trying to find a nice way to leave without seeming odd, since we just arrived and already I'm not interested in the clothes. I pulled out my phone and guy one said to us something along the lines of, "No phones please." And there was also a sign above us that stated, "No pictures," so I just thought they didn't like pictures being taken, which is fair enough. At this point, guy one was standing a few feet behind us, next to a side door along the wall of the shop. And guy two was sitting in a chair across from this side door. I was getting bored and just wanted to leave, so I whispered to my boyfriend, "We can go now." And as we turned, guy one opened up the side door and said, "We have more downstairs, come look." Now a few things to note. I am slightly paranoid of being abducted, but then again, what girl isn't? And 2, yes, it's not bizarre for a shop in Camden Town to have a lower underground floor level as many of the shops we went into did. It was just slightly bizarre that this stairway resembled a basement, if you will, not an open and large stairway to the lower level like the other shops. Just one door that opened up to a U-shaped stairway into the basement. After he said this, my boyfriend, the silly nut he is, just followed the man down the stairs. I stood in the doorway having this awful pit in my stomach and just watched them get halfway down when all of a sudden guy two, who was behind me at this point, said, "Go on." And I felt so uncomfortable after hearing that I just said, "No, I'm okay." I called for my boyfriend and said, "We're leaving, come on." I just grabbed his hand and left very quickly. We walked down the road a bit and I was very shaken up as it was just a very bizarre situation. If they had more clothes downstairs, why did they say it so creepily? Why not just say, "If you're interested, we have some more downstairs, just let me know." My boyfriend was not as spooked as me. He actually told me I was most likely overthinking it, and I understood why. It wasn't until after I got home to the States and told my mom and coworkers about this encounter that anyone raised any sort of concern. Everyone I've told this story to has agreed there was something off, and on top of the store not being there anymore, it just makes me feel more weirded out. And I understand, it could have been a genuine store, but the no phone thing, the creepy basement gesture, and the assertive way they spoke to us just made me not want to risk it.